We've got another candidate tonight. He's got some fresh ideas, and he wants to be your Secretary of State, of all things. John Carlevale is our guest. Who? Hey, listen, the only way that you get any recognition is by getting on these programs and telling everybody who you are and what you want to do. He's a Republican candidate for statewide office. Let me say that again. A Republican candidate for statewide office. Don't take it for granted. They're few and far between. So I'm looking forward to meeting him tonight and having you meet him, and of course getting your response on your state of mind at the end of the broadcast. In the meantime, we've got things we need to discuss, so let's go to the rundown. Yeah, awful tough trip back to the Netherlands. In Gaza, we've got too many lives being lost right now, and perhaps there's some light at the end of this tunnel. Here at home, the mayor of Providence fights back. And what, did you ever play any golf with somebody and your opposition partner is like making double bogey and you're making double bogey? It's called a pillow fight. That's what's going on in the Democratic gubernatorial race at this point. Let's move on here. Okay, very nice. It's sort of. I mean, I wrote that. McKee turns up the heat. It's kind of like a low boil to simmer at this juncture, but it's worth getting into. You didn't know that, did you? And behind that, it's like something like 7 billion hot dogs a day. No, a year. Yeah, it's like 8,000 hot dogs a minute. No, a second. I saw this data earlier today. I never wrote it down. I'm not so good with the math. People eat a lot of hot dogs. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's dig into these important matters and not so important matters. Yeah, this is a tough trip. Here's the headline. Well, first of all, forget the headline. This is what we need to show you. Just showed me this today. I could not believe when I read this. The Associated Press originally, early today, put the first tweet out there. Dutch military plane carrying bodies from Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 crash lands in Eindhoven. People went nuts. Oh, sorry. Like the kids say, just kidding. Dutch military plane carrying Malaysia Airline bodies lands in Eindhoven. The Associated Press clarifies. How about an apology to the world for the thousands of people that read your tweets, retweeted what could have been doubly, triply, quadruply tragic news? You know, it's very funny. Journalists hold everybody to a very high standard, but when journalists make a mistake, it's like, oh, sorry, oops, no big deal. Anyway, the headline for today's stuff, that is an absolute slow and sad journey, no doubt, and here's some of the coverage from CBS earlier today.
The first victims of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 arrived to a somber ceremony at Eindhoven Air Base in the Netherlands. The coffins were given military honors as the Dutch observe a national day of mourning.
You see it on everybody, on the faces from everybody. You see it. They want the children back. That's important for the family.
Yeah, I mean, listen, at least these bodies with the ceremony today were treated. The remains of these poor victims who were shot out of the sky unwittingly and without absolutely no notice. Nobody knew what hit them. At least they were offered the kind of dignity that they certainly were not offered in the fields of eastern Ukraine over the last week or so. God bless them, and the families, I'm sure, feel just a little bit better that there is some dignity now in this process. Speaking of process, to the Middle East we go, and ceasefire talks are underway, and Secretary of State John Kerry is there. The headline reads as follows. Yes, he's in there at Tel Aviv trying to, make some sense of all this. And of course, there's some politics, they say, to the FAA restrictions. We'll talk about that in a second, but here's the latest from the network.
With even more deadly fighting overnight, Secretary of State John Kerry arrived in Tel Aviv this morning. Kerry and the UN Secretary General are trying to push for a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians. Amid intensified fighting, the FAA banned American airliners from flying into Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport yesterday for 24 hours. In a show of support late Tuesday night, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg boarded an El Al flight for Israel.
Sure, take the flight. It's safe and it's efficient.
Bloomberg's trip aimed at reassuring people it's safe to fly to the country. Israel wants Secretary Kerry to lift the ban, insisting there's no real danger to civilian aircraft in the region.
No, but there is, it might be, listen, you know, for the most part, I mean, when you score at home, America supports Israel in these matters, and Hamas just, you know, picked away and picked away and picked away at this point, and now they got what is coming to them. Tunnels are being jammed. Unfortunately, too many innocent lives are being lost, but those are shields for the Hamas mindset. Terrible. Look, we got to end this thing somehow, and at least having that FAA ban, while it may not be political, it may be strategic. And by the way, missiles know no politics when they hit something out of the sky, and so raw and fresh off of last week's awful thing with the Malaysian flight over the Ukraine, it makes all sense in the world to have the FAA ban on American flights. Michael Bloomberg aside, appreciate his show of support and his confidence, but that ought to go probably, at least in part, with the flow of the negotiations. I'm talking about the FAA ruling. In the meantime, let's come back home here and talk about what's happening with the governor's race democratically. You know, Gina had her ad, her jean-wearing ad, hanging out with the iron workers, the iron worker guy who's got no job. You've seen it, right?
I've been an iron worker for 30 years. I helped build just about every building you see here. Then Mayor Tavares got elected. He jacked up commercial property tax rates, and that drives away jobs. No wonder Rhode Island has the highest unemployment rate in the country. And Providence is worse. I've hardly worked in 3 years. Angel's not a bad guy, but he's more of the same. Gina's saving worker pensions. She's got guts. That's what we need to create jobs, too.
John, I love her hanging out with the tough guys there, right? So, you know, Angel ain't a bad guy. You know, it's kind of a soft negative ad, right? But Angel came back with his own today.
You've probably seen that ad where Treasurer Raimondo is blaming me for Rhode Island's economy. We know better. The state was already struggling when the Wall Street crash made it worse. As a new mayor, I found a city on the brink of bankruptcy, so I rolled up my sleeves and cut my own pay. Now our crime rate is down, unemployment is down, jobs and construction are coming back. There's more to do, but this I know. My opponent wants to throw stones from on high. I want to build a better future from the ground up.
Yeah, it's a nice comeback. So, you know, I'd call it a draw. But I got to tell you, Angel, would you knock it off with the cut my own pay stuff? Please. If you listen to the ad, so I rolled up my sleeves and cut my own pay. So you rolled up your sleeves and cut your own. What else did you do? It's a bad ad that way. And this notion that it's almost as if Angel Tavares, when he cut his pay, when he had the hurricane, you know, the fiscal hurricane, and he had all of these other concessions he was asking for from employees on both salary and pension, and he cut his own pay to be common ground with them and commensurate with them. It was almost as if he's saying, you know what, it's a good thing I'm cutting all these salaries and bringing all this fiscal discipline, because when I run for governor, I can say I cut my own pay. Enough with the I cut my own pay. You know, it wasn't that big a hardship for you. It was symbolic. What was it, 10%? 10 grand? Enough. Enough. So, you know, it's a pillow fight between those two, isn't it? I mean, this just kind of, doesn't it leave you wanting? I mean, if they're going to get after it, get after it. If not, just forget it. By the way, Clay Pell is out of this whole debate, and he's running more ads than Carter's Got Pills, and he's going to crawl up in this poll, and you watch, in 50 days or less, without a lot of contention in this race, with him, like, you know, kind of, you know, rolling and drafting off these two, you know what's going to happen. Next item. McKee turns up the heat. You know, I overwrote that. My friend Dan McKee had a press conference today. He asked for all the public records from the now Secretary of State Ralph Mollis on the 38 Studios stuff. You know, the whole lobbying thing where Mollis now has hearings going on for Michael Corso, one of the principal guys who we found through Tim White's journalistic work, actually had a contract for what appears to be lobbying. Now McKee is asking for an independent counsel to take a look at the broad picture here.
At the moment, I'm not saying this is a criminal investigation. I think that the taxpayers in this state deserve to know, you know, the timelines and what was done and who knew what at what time and all the way through the process. So what I'm suggesting is a third-party counsel that would be completely removed from the elected officials.
Yeah, it's like, all right, whatever. You know, listen. The McKee campaign says we're going to have an online petition, and they didn't even give the website. It's like somebody needs to energize that McKee campaign, because, you know, having a pillow fight with Ralph Mollis over 38 Studios ain't going to get him there either. He's a smart guy, a pretty good wonk, and he's got some good ideas in education and municipal finance. If this is all he's got, he better stick with that. All right, go to McCoy. Watch yourself a ball game. Have yourself a burger. Oh, I'm sorry. PETA says have yourself a veggie. Yes, because McCoy is the third-ranking minor league stadium in the country when it comes to vegetables at the ball game. What a joke this is. I mean, I love McCoy. The winners of PETA's 2014 vegetarian-friendly MLB stadium rankings are Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball were ranked. I don't know what that sandwich was. We couldn't figure it out. Some kind of tofu. Not a chance. What I think is ironic is, you know, for 1 out of what, every 12 people, I don't know what the number is, having themselves a veggie something, the rest of the crowd is sitting there woofing burgers and dogs like it's going out of style. I don't know what the PETA people say about that other than, I don't know what PETA people say about that. I just don't even know. Nor do I know what they say about this next item. Did you know that this is National Hot Dog Day? Yes, it is. And you see the Onivals right here. What do you call those things? Gaggers? Kev? Gaggers. Well, let me tell you something. While I respect Oniville, New York system hot dogs and wieners, if you will, there's nothing, and I submit this for your perusal and feedback, there's nothing like a soubrette hot dog in lukewarm, dirty water on a street corner in Manhattan with some onion and a little bit of Gulden's mustard. Now, Jess wants to ruin my little party here by showing this video of the hot dog pigs that go into this Nathan's thing. This is enough, when you look at this, never to have another hot dog again. I don't know what else to say. She wanted to run that video, so we're running that video. That is disgusting! You people are disgusting. John Carlevale is next. He's not disgusting. Those people are disgusting. Take a look. A lot of chatter around the Secretary of State's office. You know, current Secretary of State Ralph Malus having hearings sort of on 38 Studios. Now Dan McKee busting his horns, as I told you last segment. Here's some of the issues for our next guest who says, hey, listen, can we get back and focus on some of this stuff? Voter ID law, constitutional conventions. Take a look at that whole thing. We might run down a handful of them. Anyway, John Carlevale is my guest, a Republican for statewide office. It's always nice to see Republicans for statewide office. We don't always get a full menu of them every election cycle.
We have it this year.
We have it this year. Welcome to the broadcast. Nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
Former
Dan.
professor,
Thank you so much.
retired professor.
Correct.
CCRI, human development, child
Development, family relations is my specialty.
And you've retired for how long now?
14 years.
And you produce the State of the State Public Access Program.
Correct.
So you were completely immersed in the local issues. You know,
since 1991.
You know what's going on. And I'm sure many
do.
people watching the show right now know exactly about you and what you produce. So good work. Secretary of State's office, why?
Well, Dan, it's a very important office from a number of different perspectives. But since 1991, I have been engaged in what I refer to as the exercise of my political citizenship. And the Secretary of State's office is a wonderful venue within, for example, elections to help people understand that concept, the exercise of their political citizenship. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do that by voting. We do that by helping people on their campaigns. We do that by becoming candidates ourselves, by going to the General Assembly and testifying for or against a bill that's under consideration. So there's a multitude of different ways, Dan, that we exercise our political citizenship.
You are such a teacher. No, I feel like I just entered into a classroom on civics. And you know what? We need a classroom on civics.
Well, Dan, that's
we are
one
as dumbed down when it comes to knowing what the hell is going on with this democracy as I've ever seen.
Indeed. And that's one of my platforms, to restore civics education to elementary and secondary school, and then to take that civics education, which I experienced when I went to elementary school and high school. Of course, the dinosaurs roamed the earth, but nonetheless, we had civics education. And then I want to take that and expand it to the general public.
How?
Well, through a variety of different ways. I've been doing it on my television show, State of the State, by bringing people before our viewing audience who are in a sense, prominent and influential Rhode Islanders. And so I would use the Secretary of State's office to hold forums, classes, if you will, on citizenship and government. And for me, Dan, and I've heard you talk about this many, many times, the Secretary of State's office is a treasure trove of historical documents. You could get a PhD if you went to the library that's part of the Secretary of State's office. And what I want to do, in addition to some of the things we just mentioned, is to create an archives museum. Now, this is not my idea. This is the idea of the current Secretary of State, Ralph Mollis. He was interviewed on State of the State, and he was asked by the interviewer, Mr. Mollis, is there anything that you didn't accomplish that you really wanted to accomplish? And he talked about the Archives Museum. So I'm hoping to make that become a reality.
Well, it's a very different take, actually, from most of the candidates who run for Secretary of State who try to baffle us into this idea that it's a business development job. We'll ask John about that. I'm sure there's some application to that. But he's got some interesting items on his list. Stay with us. Welcome back. John Carlevale is my guest, a former professor, and he's been hosting and producing State of the State, a public access show for a long time. He wants to be your Secretary of State. And John, you've got a couple of issues that we posted. Voter ID and the Constitutional Convention are two key issues in this race. The Democrats, Nelly Gorbea and Guillaume de Ramel, we have their pictures. They should appear hopefully later in the season, come primary time. They want to repeal voter ID. I'm like,
yes.
What? Real quick one on this.
Well, you know, Dan, when I talk about this, people say the same thing. What? Why would anyone want to repeal the voter ID law?
Disenfranchising the voters is the argument.
Well,
it's the key line. There's not really any depth to the conversation, but
no, there's no merit to that argument. And last election was the first time the voter ID law was in effect. It virtually went without a hitch, and as a result of the voter ID law, 60% of provisional ballots were rejected. So what does that tell us? The voter ID law is doing exactly what it was intended to do.
So you'll fight for it?
Absolutely.
Constitutional Convention, that's a sticky one. While in concept you'd want to revisit the way our structure of the state operates, at the same time, I'm so worried about the disengaged public that a Constitutional Convention could be literally taken hostage by special interests. Your thought?
There's always that concern, Dan. But in a Constitutional Convention, if we elect the right people, then they will develop ideas that may be presented to the voters for either acceptance or rejection. The last time this happened was in 1986. There were 14 referendum items presented that came out of the Constitutional Convention. 8 of them passed, 6 of them rejected. The ones that the public rejected were dogs. I have faith in the Rhode Island voter that they can distinguish between what is in their best interest and the state's best interest and that which is not.
Well, we'll have you back, win or lose in the election, because we need a smart voice or 2 or 10 on that particular matter. I love this notion of majority required for election. Talk about that one, because a lot of people ask me about this. You know, people getting elected with less than 50% of the vote.
And that happened during the last gubernatorial election.
Yes, it did.
And if we had majority requirement, or what some states refer to as majority preference voting,
or
runoff, the election has to be won by a majority of vote, 50% plus 1 vote. And states do it differently. Municipalities do it differently. Sometimes they have an instant runoff, where when we vote for our first choice, and our second choice, and our third choice. And if someone doesn't win by majority the first count, then they go to second level, count the votes up, and then see what the outcome is.
I'm not sure I'd want to rank my choices in an election, but I certainly would like to see runoff elections when somebody doesn't get 50%.
And that's just one option, Dan.
Okay. You're going to fight for that as Secretary of State?
Absolutely.
All right, so most of what I see here in your platform is civics, election law, da-da-da, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Which is really the meat of what the Secretary of State's office does. There's a lot of creative thinking that's going into this. What about the business application, this phony nonsense where this is like a business development office? It's not.
Well,
I mean, you can make it easier for businesses to record their LLCs.
that's the divisions
whatever.
office. And it ought to be a place where it's easy to register your corporation, your business, where it's easy to get the kind of information that you need to get. Who do I talk to? When am I ready to talk to that person? That should all be part of that. I will say that it's done fairly well, Dan. Could it be tweaked? Could it be improved? Absolutely. There's very little in this world that cannot be improved.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm refreshed by the idea that you're kind of going back to the core of what a Secretary of State's office ought to be. Civics, election law, creative ideas to make elections more competitive, more compelling, and more understood by the public. So I'm bullish on what you have to say. You come back later in the election season against the Democrat that prevails in the primary, won't you?
Yes, indeed.
And we'll have you on the radio, and we'll take some phone calls, too, about some of your ideas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. John Carlevale, smart guy, teacher. Your state of mind when we come back, too. I was impressed by John Carlevale. Tell me what you think about him. Offer your state of your mind or your state of mind. You know what I'm talking about. 228-1886 is the voicemail. stateofmind@myritv.com is the email. Tweet and Facebook post. Leave the E in or you won't get through. Here's a voicemail and reaction again to Chris Young's visit from last week. You know, Chris.
Tell Chris Young there's more people riding around that aren't paying car taxes in Providence and don't have insurance, and he's going to get votes.
Did you get that? What Teddy's saying is there are more deadbeats out there than taxpayers. You might have a point, Teddy. By the way, 6 beer limit before you call My State of Mind. We'll see you tomorrow on the radio at noon. Bye.